The Hero's Journey, a Mindful Accord podcast, with your host, Rich Decker.
Hello and welcome to The Hero's Journey, a Mindful Accord podcast. The podcast where you can capture strength for your hero's journey. Our guest today is Jean Pomeroy. Jean is a Certified Meditation Instructor through the University of Holistic Theology and the president and founder of Workforce and Lifeforce Meditations. Jean created Workforce Meditations in 2015 to help employees reduce workplace stress through on-site guided meditation classes. In 2016, Jean created Lifeforce Meditations to offer the same services through video meditations to people around the globe as an avenue to live a life with more peace and ease. Jean currently manages Workforce and Lifeforce Meditations, as well as appearing at speaking engagements throughout the United States, where she talks about where stress comes from and why mindfulness and meditation are so effective in reducing it. One thing about our conversation is Jean brought up an important point, something we so quickly forget. And that's we have the power to create what we want in our lives. And moreover, we must learn to quiet our minds to align ourselves with that power. Now, Jean's story is not one of sudden change. Her story has evolved over the course of time. You don't have to have some major traumatic event in order to transform yourself. You have to see that you are the creator and the solution to your problems. Here's Jean Pomeroy. Thank you for joining us today, and I'm very interested in your story and how you went from where you were to where you are now. The first thing I've always asked everybody is tell me a little bit about your childhood. Who was Jean growing up? What principles, for better or worse or to your detriment, did your parents, what principles did they pass on down to you?
Sure. Well, I grew up in a suburb of Chicago, so I had a very typical suburban life. I grew up on a street where there were at least 5 kids my age. We were all in a carpool to get to school together, and we played every day until it got dark. I lived down the street from a seminary, and the seminary had church bells. So when the church bells would ring 6 o'clock, that was the time to come home, and all the kids would scatter and end up back home for the day. So whether it was in the brood of winter and we were sledding, after school or during the day, or it was running around playing football, we were out all the time. And I was quite a tomboy as a kid. In fact, I remember that in 7th grade, it was a time where it was the 80s, early 80s, and miniskirts became popular. So I bought a miniskirt and I went to school with a miniskirt on, and the girls thought it was cute, and the boys harassed me because they didn't know who that Jean was. The Jean they knew was rough and tumble and consistently playing football or falling off her bike and skinning her knee. And so it took a little while for me to transition from that tough tomboy to a little girl that was growing up. I enjoyed my childhood. I was very fortunate. My parents were married for a portion of my childhood. My parents divorced when I was 10, and I had one sibling. I have a sister that's 8 years younger than me, so I tended to take care of her since there was such a big difference in our ages. When my parents divorced, my dad had been seeing somebody that he worked with, and it happened very quickly as they were found out. They were in love, and my parents were divorced at the end of one year, and my dad was married by March of the next year. And they've been married like 35, 37 years now. She's my stepmother, and they're very happy. So it was an interesting time, though, because when it was found out, it was September, and there was chaos in my house. I didn't really understand what was going on, but there was chaos, and I had a 2-year-old little sister. And I was told that my parents were splitting, and I took it as well as a 10-year-old can take it. And my mother was a stay-at-home mom, as most of the moms were at that time. And her parents, who lived about an hour away, came down and sat me down and said that, your mom's in a bad place right now. And we are going to help her out until your sister is in kindergarten, and then your mom's going to get a job, and here's how it's going to work, and here's how it's going to look, and here's your grandfather's business card in case there's an emergency. I believe that that's what they said. I believe in hindsight that they said, in case something were to happen to your mom, you're the oldest, here's the phone number, we're here for you guys. But that's not what 10-year-old Jean heard. What 10-year-old Jean heard was, you're now in charge. Your mom's lost her mind, and you have to take care of your mother and your sister. And that is clearly how I ended up spending the rest of my childhood. Unfortunately, 2 months after that, my mother's father died 54 of a heart attack. So if my mother wasn't in a tailspin to begin with, she really fell off the wagon at that point. And she ended up having to have 2 jobs at a time. And I did take care of my sister, and I mowed the lawn and I fixed the shower head. And at 10 years old, I kind of took over. I don't think that that was what was intended, but I realized that, to me, that's where I was supposed to go. And so it started a life of being the caretaker for others. Whether they wanted to be taken care of or not was a whole nother story. It seemed that that was my purpose at 10-year-old's mind.
Do you have resentment towards your father still?
None at all. As an adult, I understand that life happens as life happens, and I've been very fortunate that my parents did not speak. My mother would have nothing to do with my dad for many years. And then I had a child. And when I had a child, I said, look, I had separate Christmases and separate birthday parties and separate everything growing up. And I'm not going to do that to my child. So I will have one birthday party and one Christmas, and you can all show up or you can not. And although it took a few years, my parents give each other a small token of Christmas present when they come at Christmas every year. And they're friendly to each other. And it took a while to get to that point, but I'm very fortunate that our families are all together.
Well, that's good. You were 10 when parents were divorced?
Correct.
You had to take over and become the boss. So how did you learn how to do that?
Well, because my mother was a stay-home mother, she wasn't making any money, and all of a sudden she was forced to work, and she was ticked. And it was very clear very quickly that there was lack. And there might have been lack before, but I didn't realize it. But it turned into a conversation of constant lack and directed at my dad putting her in this position. So I think that at that point, I realized that you don't depend on anyone else. You take care of yourself so that you're never in a position of needing anyone else. And that has been something that has been a blessing and a curse in my life as I've become fiercely independent and have had to learn the power of vulnerability.
That's interesting. Power of vulnerability. That's very interesting. So when you were a teenager and you're going through all this, what did you see Jean being? Who was Jean going to be when she grew up?
Well, what happened for me is that at 14, my mother decided to move to Arizona from Chicago, and I was moved away from my dad. That was very difficult for me. And I started high school not knowing one soul. So I was a very popular kid and moved to a place I didn't know and didn't know anyone. And that independence really took its hold. And I did a few things to try to make some side money as a 14-year-old. I started babysitting for people in the neighborhood and ended up hanging out with the older brother of the kids I was babysitting for. And I ended up hanging out with an older crowd. And in high school, that independence turned into getting in trouble. So I was not the ideal child in high school. But the thing that happened for me more than anything was that I rebelled against school. I was not a bad student, but I would sit in a class and I would say, my gosh, it's 1 p.m, the stock market is open, and I'm sitting with all these kids. What am I doing here? I'm not sure what teenager thinks that way, but I did.
Very interesting. You're like a young entrepreneur.
Certainly. I wanted to be out working, and so I did. I worked full-time starting at 15. I lied about my age. I took 2 bus transfers to get to downtown Phoenix from Scottsdale.
That must have taken like a half a day back then.
It took a long time.
Because it's bad now, but I can't imagine back then.
It did. It took like an hour and a half, which meant that I had to leave school at noon. So at sophomore year, I took half classes because I wanted to work. I didn't want to be there. And the buses would not run past 9 o'clock, so my best friend, who was 16, would drive to come get me to pick me up. So I started working early. That Midwestern work ethic, the one thing my dad certainly showed me and taught me throughout my life and always said was, you got to do what you got to do. That's my Italian little short dad. And I always felt that way, that you put your head down and you work. So to me, that was the right thing to do.
Well, that's very interesting. So what did you see yourself doing? We when we're teenagers, we have this idea of, I'm going to be this or be that.
I think I just saw myself as an executive in some capacity. I didn't know what business I didn't have a passion for anything like that, but I knew that I would be in charge, that I would be a leader, and that I would be directing whatever was going on.
Wow. So that was pretty firm when you were a teen.
It wasn't an option.
It wasn't an option. Very interesting. When did you start a family? When did you get married and start having kids?
That friend of mine that was 16 that would pick me up from that job turned into my husband years later.
Very interesting.
I met him when I was 15, and we moved in together when we were 18. And we were married by 21.
Wow.
So I married my best friend. We were not tied to anything, so it was a lot of fun. We worked hard. We both always had jobs. Even when we got married, we took on a second job where we sat right next to each other to pay for the wedding. And we were both workers, so it was a good combination. We had a turn of events where we took a vacation and we're on the East Coast, and we both said, wow, that was fun. I'd love to live there. What do you think? And we decided to move, put our house up for sale, and I lived in Virginia for 5 years in my early 20s. And during that time is when I had my first son.
So what were you working towards your business empire then?
Not so much. When I was in my early 20s here, I worked for a company that was an insurance administrator. So when I moved to Virginia, I had worked with an insurance company over there over the phone for many years, and I knew that they would hire me on. And they did. So I worked for a large insurance company there. I didn't sell insurance, although I had my license, and I was the one that handled the insurance for all the employees, the 700 employees of the company. But I always figured I would work my way up through something like that. We had 5 wonderful years in Virginia, one too many ice storm. And my husband said, I think I would be willing to go back. We'd had my son. My mother was here. We said, you know what? I would too. Let's go back. And it was at that point that my husband, who loved going to open houses and loved looking at houses, said, you know what? You've talked about wanting to get out of the insurance gig. Maybe you should sell real estate. And my response was, why in the world would I want to do that? I have no interest in looking at houses. And he said, yes, but you can sell anything. And if you start it, I'll join in. And that seemed like a decent idea. And that's how I ended up getting into real estate.
It was kind of by default.
I started his career. There's no doubt about it. Unfortunately, somehow I ended up continuing to do it. Flew out, took a 9-day crash course, and had my license and just hit the ground running.
In Arizona?
Yes.
Here. Now, why did your mom want to move to Arizona? That seems like a big change.
My mom was born in Idaho, and she had her father was a leather craftsman. I can remember sitting on his lap as a kid, getting a piece of leather, wetting the leather, and letting him have me hammer out the little designs. And he did saddles and purses, and that whole Western lifestyle was something that she liked. And she had a cousin that lived out here, and I think that she just wanted to start something new, that it was hard for her back in the suburbs of Chicago. She was done with the winter, and that she wanted to step out on her own, and that was her way to do it. So that's how she ended up in Arizona. And I think that I didn't appreciate Arizona because I was brought out, and it took me leaving to decide, yes, this is what I choose now to come back.
I see, that's interesting. So it was kind of like your mom was leaving home to go out on her own.
Absolutely.
With you and your sister. Did your mother ever remarry?
She never remarried.
She never remarried?
No.
Did she have resentment towards your father?
I think she will always have resentment towards my father, but she has learned how to be able to put that aside enough for us to have a family and not have it be something that gets in the way of my experience or my children's experience of family.
To not get remarried or something for that generation is a bit, I don't want to say odd, it's just...
She dated a little. She got burned again, and that was it. She was done.
She decided to kind of become a nun?
Yeah, she checked out. There's no doubt.
She checked out of the mating season.
That's it, no doubt.
So you were on a certain path. And how many kids do you have?
I have 2 children. I've been married twice, and I have a son from each marriage.
Oh. So you were kind of on that typical path that many people in our culture, and I'm not knocking it, but it's kind of how we're raised. We're conditioned, you get the family, the kids, the 2.3 kids, the whatever, the vacation once a year. Was that the life you wanted, or what?
I absolutely thought that was the life I wanted. I was married to my best friend, and I thought that that's exactly what you do. People talk about that. I was very fortunate to have that. I now have a business where I look at it as I run it myself. That's not what real estate is in any way, shape, or form. People think it's lots of money and you schedule your own time. That's absolutely not what happened.
What changed? So you have the life you think you want. Something must have changed in you to not want that anymore. What was that, if you can think of it?
I can absolutely tell you what it was. I had a friend that worked as an agent at the same company that I worked at, and he told me about a class that he did called Landmark Education. And I didn't know anything about it, but I respected him tremendously. And he said, look, this class changed the way I view life. Just do it. Just pay for it. Do it for 3 days. You sit and listen. That's all it is. 70 people sitting in chairs. It's one great big conversation. You got nothing to lose. And just based on his suggestion, I did it. I didn't look into it. I just did it. And it was absolutely something that did transform my life, because the conversation that they have is based in the idea that you really start your life with a completely blank canvas. And when you take responsibility for everything that you have in your life, that you filled that canvas with the good, with the bad, that you have control over what you perceive, what you think, and that your mind is not who you are. You have the power to create what it is that you want. And I never looked at life that way before. Certainly, I look at it that most people are in a trance of their mind and thinking whatever they think is the truth. And I believe that. And to think that it starts out, as they say, empty and meaningless, and not in a bad way. It just has no meaning. Everything we think, everything that we perceive, we give meaning to. And that meaning can be whatever we want it to be. That changed my perspective entirely. It had me look at things differently. It had me realize that I was married to my best friend. And it's great fun to be married to your best friend. But I wasn't passionately in love with my husband. And that was an experience of life that I wanted to have, that I didn't have. And I started to realize that I looked at the things that I had as contentment. And that contentment was a good thing. And I realized from that utter fulfillment is what you want out of life. Contentment is settling. And I didn't want to settle anymore. And it changed my perspective and it changed my trajectory.
Now, this is called Landmark Education?
LandmarkEducation.com. And all it is the way that they explain it is that conventional education takes what you don't know. I don't know how to fly a plane. And you take what you do know. I do know how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And you learn what you need to learn to put the don't know in the do know. They don't work in that. They work in what you don't know that you don't know. The things that you're doing that you have no idea you're doing because somebody said something when you were 5 and it affects you at 50. It's peeling back the layers of the onion so that you see how you got to where you are and you take responsibility for where you are and know that you can have whatever you want, that whatever you are interested in is a possibility in life and you're not held back by anything. You choose it, you create it, you give it the meaning.
So that was kind of a moment of clarity for you after you came out of that 3 days. You're like, the world I see now is vastly different than the world I saw before.
Absolutely, because before, things were done to me. Things happened to me. Yeah. After that, I realized I created all of this, and I can continue to create it just like it is, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if I'm not utterly fulfilled, I have the opportunity to create it in any way I want, and that changed everything for me.
So are you familiar with the concept of emptiness from Buddhism perspective?
Yes.
So that's exactly what
Same thing.
Yeah.
Yep.
That we project meaning onto everything, and if you plant different seeds or thoughts in your mind, it will be different and your world will be different. We project our world. The world is as it is. The world is the world, but as I see it is as I am.
Absolutely, because the world doesn't exist without the I am. And that's what many people don't understand, that everything that you have is absolutely 100% perspective and an opinion. Fact is an illusion.
Stoicism's the same philosophies.
Certainly.
Yeah, I've really gotten into Stoicism lately. It has many similarities to Buddhism, but that's the same thing, right? It's all opinion. It's all conjecture. That this table that I'm pointing to right now is a table to you and I, but to someone that's never seen that, it could be anything, right?
Absolutely. And the only reason it's a table is that there's a collective agreement.
Right.
If the collective agreement was that this was sacred and that you never got near it and you never touched it, and I walked over and touched it, you'd call the police and have me thrown out right now.
Or
and
burn you at the stake or something.
Absolutely. And guess what? That would be the truth, and you would be right in doing it, because that is your reality. And when you take away what's real and you start dealing with what's left is simply whatever you put into it, and it changes everything.
That's a great philosophy. And you learned all that in 3 days?
Well, that was in the year 2000, so it took me 17 years to get to this point, but it started that trajectory for me.
It planted some seeds in your mind, and it germinated over those years.
Absolutely.
That was, it wasn't a sudden change. And I know you mentioned before you didn't have this big traumatic event in your life that caused you to abandon the way you looked at life. So it was a slow trajectory. Did you understand what was happening to you when it was happening?
No, but I certainly had I couldn't look at the things in my life as not my responsibility anymore. And anything that wasn't making me totally fulfilled and happy, content didn't work anymore. So that was in my face. I couldn't look around it and continue to be okay with it. It now was right in front of me. And it gave me the opportunity to have possibilities that I never thought possible before. And it made me understand that not only was my marriage, although a wonderful man, and he's still my very best friend, it was unfulfilling for me, so was my career. I certainly enjoyed the fact that I knew what I was doing. I was always, and I'll say it, an excellent real estate broker. I knew the law. I knew exactly how things worked. I was a very good negotiator. I had a wonderful teacher. Can I tell you that?
Of course, please. I'm going to ask you that question. Who was your greatest mentor?
I'm not sure this person was my greatest mentor, although I certainly learned a lot from him. In the suburbs of Chicago on Saturday morning in the summer, I would be woken up pretty early. Jeannie, come on, wake up, let's go. And I'd be like, oh, Dad, do I have to? Come on, let's go. And my dad would drag me out to garage sales. And I saw a master negotiator at work, the way that he would take something and say, well, this is good because of this, but you're not going to be able to sell it for this because of this. But you're pretty lucky because for whatever reason, I actually need it because of this. So here's what I'm willing to give you. And I learned by watching this technique and had no idea that when I started in real estate, that I was doing the exact same thing in negotiating for my clients. And negotiations is not taught in real estate school. And unfortunately, many people are very unskilled at it. So it gave me the advantage in many cases. And I knew that it was clearly not manipulating, but taking care of my clients in a way that did give me satisfaction. But ultimately, selling real estate was not the it for me.
They do not teach negotiation in real estate. That seems shocking to me, if I might say, because it would seem to me that's like the biggest part of real estate.
You would think so, but it's not even addressed.
Really?
Absolutely.
Shocking.
Yep.
Shocking. Yep. So your dad was a good salesman.
Yeah, and that's not what he did for a living, but he understood negotiations, and he was a wheeler dealer. My dad restores street rods, and back in the day it was Model A's and V8 Fords, and we were in all kinds of car clubs, and he was the auctioneer. So there was always this wheel deal thing going on, and I watched it happen and had no idea that it was helping me in a future career.
When did you decide this real estate it's not what I want to do? I want to do something different, which became Workforce Meditations?
Well, there were a few things that preceded that. I decided that real estate wasn't for me, and I started a company called Realty Match to save the world from the realtors that didn't know what they were doing.
All the ones that went to school and didn't know how to negotiate?
That's exactly it.
Wow, so. I bet you I had a few of them.
Believe me, spit, you'll hit one. I did that for 5 years. That was a fairly successful company. We ended up working in 29 different states, but the recession hit. I ended up going back and forth with real estate a few times. I did get divorced and got remarried and had another baby at almost 40. So I now have a 20-year-old and an 8-year-old. So those things were going on in my life. And I will say that getting divorced in my early 30s was a very interesting thing because I had never dated as an adult. I had been with my husband for many years and lived with him since I was 18. So at 32, I went, oh my gosh, who's going to want me? And then I started getting asked out. And I'm like, ooh, who wants me? So what I did then was I started writing a dating column for a local paper. That's kind of how I am, that my life shows up somehow in my work. And it was starting to happen more and more in that way. And the people that I had been exposed to prior to 2000, Deepak Chopra, Wayne Dyer, I had read some of their books. My mother was interested in them. And I certainly had been exposed to them. All of a sudden had a different sense for me after that class. And as time went on and as I discovered who I was as a human being and as an adult, that those spiritual teachers had such an effect on my life that it started to change who I was. And it was certainly Wayne Dyer, Dr. Wayne Dyer, who died last year now or 2 years ago? I was 3 months from seeing him. I had tickets to see him live. And it was his influence that had me start to meditate. It was some of his books. He even had a couple meditation CDs where I understood the concept of being able to create for myself, but I wasn't at the point of being able to quiet my mind so that my mind wasn't still influencing everything that was going on. And it was through the spiritual teachers that I started to follow that became a bigger part of my life. And it may sound silly, but Workforce Meditations and Lifeforce Meditations exist because of Oprah Winfrey. And I know that may sound a little silly, but Oprah started her channel, and I had heard that she was going to have a show called Super Soul Sunday. I did not have the station. I was in vacation with a friend, and we had all these different stations, and I said, hey, let's check out this thing, see if that Oprah network is on. And it was the very first one she ever did with Iyanla Vanzant, and she talked about the power of surrender, of letting go, understanding the absolute blasphemy of thinking that we had control in the first place. And it was through that I was able to consistently see all these spiritual teachers and leaders in one place on Sunday, that I got to spend an hour with them and to start to develop my practice and enhance my beliefs, if you can call them that. And it turned into something that was not just a part of who I was, but a passion to be able to share it with others, and the desire to have that be not only who I am, but what I do was created.
I want to ask you, so you say that we are the creator, but then we don't have control. Can you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. One of the things that I use as a visualization is a leaf. So this just helps me. It's just the way that I am. So I picture a leaf that I can actually lay in. So I can lay in my leaf and get in a little lazy river and float down the river. And once in a while, there's a fork in the river and the leaf looks like it's going right. And I know that leaf needs to go left. And so I visualize myself literally paddling as hard as I can, struggling to get over to the side to grab a twig on a tree so that I am forcing the leaf to go the way that I know it needs to go. And I hang on and I hang on and I fight the current and I fight the current. And I get to the point where I am exhausted and I no longer have the strength to hang on. And I finally have to let go. And the leaf goes to the right. And the leaf goes in exactly the right place it needed to go. And that's what I do for myself. I understand that I can put in my life the people and things that I want. I can manifest what I want in my life by having thoughts that put me in a place for the universe to have that show up. I can quiet my mind so that my ego doesn't get in front of me and I don't actually believe everything I think just because I think it. And when I let the universe take me where I need to go, I I'm exactly where I need to be. I never had control over it in the first place.
Are you saying you choose to leave?
I choose to let go of the tree.
Okay.
I choose to allow, and it's not like I had a choice to begin with. It's not like there was a choice. I'm fighting what's so, and I've learned maybe the hard way, as we all do as humans, we're all just humans having this human experience, that I fight nothing now. At least that's my goal. I'm human. I fall off the wagon. But if I'm fighting anything, whether it be a cold or my website not being done when I want it to be done, or my 20-year-old thinking that I'm an idiot, fighting that does no good. Accepting it and working through it, that gets me to exactly where I need to go.
Well, it's good to know your son is normal, that he thinks his parents are idiots.
I'm hoping that this is a phase that's lasting a very short period of time.
Well, that means he's healthy.
Yep.
Let me ask you something. We get so easily lost in the thoughts. It happens in a millisecond. Can you explain to me a method you do to try to not have that happen as much as possible?
There are many different methods you can do, whether it be from counting as you're breathing or canceling one thought with another. Those are all things that are typical ways for you to be able to focus on your breathing, which is the ideal way to get away from your thoughts. But the truth is, what works for me is that when I am meditating and I am trying to quiet my mind and I realize that I've just put together my entire grocery list, I laugh. Yeah. I laugh at the human experience and that this is exactly what I need to have happen every single time that I have a thought. I acknowledge that I have the thought. I don't give it any judgment, right or wrong, good or bad, and I let it pass. I have just trained the neurons in my brain and the connectors in my brain to not be thinking as much. And the space between that thought and the next thought will now be bigger. So there's nothing wrong with having the thought. Having the thought is part of the process that makes me a better meditator and makes me go longer without having the next thought.
That's interesting. But, here's the paradox is sometimes good ideas come when you're sitting still. I've had a couple of the last couple of days. I'm like, okay, well, I guess that's okay. I kind of want to hold on to that thought just briefly.
Right. And you can, because that is the case, is that insights show up from the quieted mind. So when you do have a thought that's an insight, there's no reason not to have that linger. You can let it go for the moment of meditation. But after meditation to go, wow, I had no idea I was thinking that. No wonder I'm struggling with this. No wonder that's showing up like that. Now that I see it, I can really let it go. And that's the whole point to me, to be able to have the insights of the things that I don't know that I'm thinking in the first place, but that can only happen through a quieted mind.
Yeah, I heard somebody, I don't remember who, was saying a good way to describe meditation to someone that doesn't know is if you want to understand your mind, yourself, you have to observe it.
Absolutely. And that's where the real crux of it comes in, because I think that most of us, without being out of the trance, without being unhooked from the matrix, we believe every single thing we think. That person is a jerk. That guy's doing it wrong. My sister doesn't know what she's doing. I'm better at this. That's wrong. That's right. That's good. That's bad. It's not, there is nothing that stops that constant stream. And it's just absolutely truth. And only through being able to understand that mind is not who I am. And how do I know that? Because I can observe my mind. So who I am is the observer of the mind. And once you realize that, and once you realize that it's not just unhooking from the matrix, it's that you're the one that plugged yourself in the first place, and you had the power to unplug it at any time, you realize that what goes on in your mind in many cases is detrimental. We have between 60 and 80,000 thoughts a day. And of those thoughts, 80% of them are negative. But what's really crazy is that 90% of them are the same darn thought you had the day before. So not only are we incessantly thinking, we're incessantly negative thinking, and we believe it.
The reason we're attracted to the negative is that our brains are wired to survive. That's their main agenda.
The ego has to stay on top.
Yeah, it's always looking for a threat. Yeah, it's a delicate balance, and it's a practice. Why would I hire Workforce Meditations, or why would I utilize Lifeforce Meditations? Why would I come to you?
Well, I think that for the workforce side, there are many, many people that are now being exposed to mindfulness and meditation, kind of a buzzword. You're seeing it on the news. You're seeing famous people that are doing it. And a lot of people think, I am stressed out, or I have anxiety, or I wish I could calm this a little bit. But they don't know exactly what that looks like, or they give it a shot and they go, well, I'm doing it wrong because I can't quiet my mind. And that's it. It's not something that becomes a practice. Through Workforce Meditations, we go on site to corporations and allow people to get away from their desk, to get away from technology. We teach them how to help them to quiet their minds through a 15-minute guided meditation, so that it's not that you're sitting there in silence and feeling uncomfortable and not knowing what they're doing. The guided meditations that we do are incredibly impactful on anything from compassion to gratitude, feeling stable and grounded, looking up from technology, so that we are guiding the mind for a little while and then allowing a silence from there, when you find out that really the theme to all of our meditations are, you've created your own suffering and there is no suffering. And to be in that place and have the silence then allows the employees to come back to their desks less stressed, refreshed, more focused, more productive employees. They have a better home work-life balance. They're not arguing with their neighbor. They're not getting sick. They're showing up for work. There's less attrition, and it's an incredible win-win for both the employer and the employee. And we've now structured our program so that we can do it on site. We can do it as a live webinar, or we can do it just based on videos that the employees can go onto the site and view at any time based on which theme they would like to experience. Lifeforce is for anybody that's not with a company that's contracted with us, so they can also go to the site, choose a meditation, and some of our meditations are based in one of the 100 most stressful life events for human beings. So when you have mother-in-law coming to town and you want to meditate around the fact that family causes you stress, we have a meditation for that, so that people can find the way to make this something that is an ongoing practice. If you meditate once a month, that's great, but it's not going to make a huge difference in your life. It's just like working out. You have to continue to work the muscle to see the results. And meditation is exactly the same way. As people make this part of their daily routine, the abundance that they receive in their life and the transformation that they receive in a way that they didn't know that they even wanted shows up. And life happens with an ease and grace that doesn't exist when you're living fully in your mind.
I was one of them too. The meditation was kind of a weird thing, like hippies and monks did it. So how do you avoid that? And how do you, especially going into the workforce, how do you avoid the religion part of it?
Well, I come from a corporate background, so all of our workforce meditations are based in a corporate structure. We really look at the meditation more as a stress reliever, an anxiety reliever, and the benefits that you get out of it can be spiritual, but that's not something that's in your face on the workforce side. On the Lifeforce side, we have a little more flexibility. So we'll be doing different types of meditation. So if somebody is looking for different types of meditation based on spiritual requests or trying out different things, we'll have those for them to be able to do. But on the corporate side, we're really looking for the people to be able to have a better experience at work, to not feel the stress that they feel. The United Nations Labor Organization has listed stress as a global epidemic at work. So people are having a bad experience at work, and this will help them not only to be able to have a better experience at work, but it flows into every area of their life and can be something that can turn into something that is more spiritual practice. But on the corporate side, we keep it corporate.
Yes, that's good, because I'm sure that that's an issue at times. Or has it been?
It hasn't been an issue. And we've been very fortunate that because mindfulness and meditation has become so mainstream, that we're not looked at as woo-woo or hippie. In many cases, certainly we're contacted by the companies to come in because they understand the importance of it. Or many companies have wellness programs now, wellness directors, where they are surveying their employees and finding out that stress is their number one issue at work. And there's not a better way to be able to combat that than through quieting the mind.
Well, I've always found it amusing. Now, I didn't find it then. So you have this, I have my work life and my life. Well, they're supposed to be separate, but the same mind works in both, right?
You got it.
There is no separation.
That's like thinking, I can't take it anymore, I'm going to move. Well, guess what? You're coming with.
Yeah, right. You're bringing the same mind that probably has no idea that your thoughts, you don't have to follow every single one of them, and you don't have to listen.
That's exactly it.
Right?
Yep.
I spent most of my life listening. I used to go through these emotional roller coasters daily, and it was all tied to my thought.
Yep. And I think most people do that. But the difference is the little break, the little crack in the thought, because until you have that, there isn't any crack in the thought. And you just continue to think. You ride the emotional roller coaster. It's just how it is. If these people wouldn't do this to me, if my boss would give me more money, if my wife would just shut up, it's all other people. There's this them and us that goes on. And by quieting the mind and having that crack in the thoughts, there's the experience of oneness where it's not them against me. It's us. We're all just here having this human experience, and everybody's perceptions and opinions have created who they are. And when you can have that little break and you're not living in a place of fighting what's going on and fighting others, then you have the opportunity to get off the roller coaster. But until then, you're just riding the treadmill and you don't know that you got on in the first place.
The treadmill you created, and you keep running faster.
That's it. Exactly. Exactly.
It's also that when you get that moment, it's like Viktor Frankl talked about, between the stimulus and the response, there's always choice. It's not easy, and 99.9% of the time we go to our programming.
Absolutely.
And I do it. I still do it.
Yes.
But at least now I can recognize it. And there's a few times when I can actually stop.
Absolutely. And that's,
it's very interesting.
You're not going to stop being human. It's a daily practice. One of the things that helps me tremendously is Eckhart Tolle. He's one of my favorite spiritual teachers. He was interviewed for that Super Soul Sunday, and she asked many questions at the end that are the same. And one of the questions she asked is, what do you believe in? And Eckhart Tolle's response was, nothing in particular. And she laughed, and I laughed watching it. And then I realized how profound that was. When you are attached to nothing, you are open to everything. And it's very difficult to judge others when you realize that you have no idea any more about this experience than they do. And when science says this is the way things are, just wait, because eventually they will say, well, that's how we thought it was. Right. And this is how it is now. We don't know. We're all just judging and evaluating. We're guessing and having our experience as our main character in the drama of our life, as Don Miguel Ruiz talks about, that no matter what you do, no matter how close you are to people, they're still just a supporting character. You will always be the main character. But when you realize that that main character is intrinsically tied to every other main character, judging and evaluating doesn't work anymore. And you realize that all of the thoughts that you're having that created them and us are an illusion that keeps you suffering.
Unfortunately, I was one where I had to experience a tremendous amount of suffering, self-created, in order to break me. I had to be broken like a wild horse.
Got it.
And I was wild. Don't get me wrong. I was wild. But, you said earlier before we began the interview that you want to tell people that they don't have to experience suffering in order to understand this. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think that a lot of people find mindfulness and meditation as a relief from some kind of traumatic experience or extended suffering. And that doesn't have to be to that point. When you're able to understand that we create any suffering that we have, you don't have to get to that point to be able to find relief. So no matter where you are, even if you're very happy in your life, there's nothing wrong with quieting your mind and seeing what other insights come in, and having a practice where you are not your mind, but the observer of your mind does nothing but improve your daily life. And could that be the precipice for keeping you from having experiences of tremendous suffering? The answer is yes. And it's not that you won't have ups and downs. Even physically, even physical pain will happen to you. I had a kidney stone recently, and it got so bad that I was going to pass out, and I told my boyfriend that we've got to go to the hospital. I can't take it. And I just practically threw myself in the back seat, laying down, and I realized that I was fighting the pain. And when I said to the pain, I know you're there. I would prefer that you weren't, but I acknowledge that you're here, and I'm not going to fight you. It changed things instantly. The suffering was still there, but it was reduced tremendously, from the death of a loved one to the loss of a job, experiencing lack. These things happen, but they happen in a very exasperated way when we feed on the suffering. And when you're able to observe your thoughts and realize that you're creating your own suffering, you can reduce the suffering that comes with the human experience.
So going back to your leaf analogy, you let go again.
Absolutely.
You let go of the twig.
Yes, absolutely.
It's going to be rough. There's going to be a lot of rapids. It's probably going to get worse. But it is. I'm going where I'm going. And
to fight is to lose. I'm going to lose. It's
absolutely.
A fight you can't win.
Absolutely. And I realized that I was fighting a lot of things in life, from why is this person taking so long to check me out at the grocery store, to things with my kids, and that there was a tremendous amount of fighting in my life. And one thing that I realized when I heard this saying that really helped me is that during the Vietnam War, apparently they were going to have a protest against the war. And they went to Mother Teresa and said, would you please join our protest against the war? And she said, absolutely not, I will not. She said, but if you have a march for peace, I would be glad to join you. Yeah. Focusing on the negative and joining the fight just creates more fight. And when I let go of the fight and allow, it's amazing the peace and grace that not only come over me, but affect everyone around me. And my family would be the first to say that I don't walk around in a state of bliss all the time by any means. Right. But I certainly...
Well, your son thinks you're an idiot.
That's it. Exactly. Exactly. So, but it is a practice, and every day gets better, and you see it more. And it's not something that I necessarily catch once in a while. I catch it more and more and more, and the experience changes. And to watch the people around me change as my experience of life is peace and grace is spectacular.
Well, let's elaborate on that.
Do they change or you change?
Oh, it's absolutely my change that allows them to not have gasoline poured on the fire.
Yeah.
That's what being combative provides. There's an issue, and if I pour gasoline on the fire, I've just created a bigger fire for them, where I can put the fire out. I have that opportunity too, and that puts the fire out for them, or at least gives them the opportunity to get rid of the embers that are left. And I have complete control over the experience that the people around me have. And it's my responsibility to take acknowledgement for the fact that I create their existence based on mine.
Well, that's a tightrope to walk. Yes.
And if you're living in a place where you understand that having bliss in your life is absolutely not something that you should be without, peace and grace come more easily, and that just spills over. So it's not something I have to try to do once I'm in that place. It's not something that I have to think about. It's who I'm being. And from whom I'm being, others are left in a place where they're not stripped of their power.
You're letting go of the twig.
Absolutely. Over and over and over. And that's why that visualization works, because sometimes I'll find myself in it, and in the middle of it, I'll go, oh my gosh, I'm hanging on to the twig. And I'll close my eyes.
I did it again.
And sometimes I'll even make a fist and physically let my hands open. And it changes it for me. It changes the experience for me. It takes me completely out of the space of suffering and fighting. There's no way to do it when you do that. And I'm instantly put in a place of peace where I can get through whatever it is that's going on.
Right. So when you went to the hospital, what did they do?
We ended up, believe it or not getting to the hospital. First I said urgent care, and it was so late there was no urgent care open. And through 20 minutes of driving around for an urgent care, I started to feel better. And I realized,
you let go?
I don't know if it was, I think that absolutely had something to do with it. I think in hindsight, I realized prior to leaving, just before we left, I had passed the stone.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Interesting.
So
it was kind of a strange coincidence.
It was. And speaking of coincidences, I love to talk about that.
Oh, let's.
I have come to the place in my life where I don't take anything for granted. And I hate to say I believe, because I understand what Eckhart was saying, but I do think that there is energy in everything, and certainly scientists will prove that everything is made of energy, that there's energy around us, and I do believe that there's energy to the universe. And I try to look at things from a place of what is my source, the divine, the universe, whoever it is, trying to tell me. And I used to have the experience of amazing coincidences starting to happen at the time that I started to meditate. Coincidence where I talked about with a friend of mine putting a stone labyrinth in my backyard, making a little stone labyrinth that I could walk through. And wouldn't that be an interesting thing? And the very next day I watched a show, and the woman that they showed had a stone labyrinth in her backyard. These were things that were really different, really unusual happenings, and they started to show up for me more and more. I'm at the point in my life in 2017 where I'm having them almost daily, where something will show up, and if it shows up once that's interesting, it'll show up 3 times. And I have come to the conclusion for myself that is just the energy of the universe showing me that I'm in the right direction. I believe that there aren't coincidences. I've had amazing, miraculous things happen in my life that I think, how in the world did that ever come together? And I've come to a place of peace knowing that was put together for me. And that if I don't fight things and I let go of the twig, and even though I think I need to go left and I go right, that allows for these things to happen and just unfold for me.
Well, it gets back to the landmark education thing, the quantum physics.
Yes.
It's probability. And I think, well, I don't want to say, I'll agree with you. I don't want to say I believe. But it's like when you get a new car. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden you see this car everywhere. I got a new Prius recently. I see Priuses everywhere. They were always there.
Right.
We just don't see them.
Absolutely.
Continually.
But when you live in a space where you've slowed down a little bit and you're able to see these things and give it a little bit of thought and give it a little bit of time to acknowledge that this is there. I had an experience day before yesterday where we were watching a show that talked about the Himalayan mountains. And within 20 minutes, I was reading a magazine and it talked about the Himalayas. And so I acknowledged that. Okay, twice in 20 minutes, that's interesting. Within an hour, my boyfriend had said, do we have some more salt? The salt shaker is empty. I went to get the salt, and we talked about Himalayan salt. I think that may sound silly and it may sound ridiculous, but to me, coincidences make up our life. Whatever this is going on for us, and none of us have any idea what's going on, and probably won't have any idea of what's going on until we leave this physical body. But there are things that I think direct us and point us in a way where we can live in knowing that we're in the right direction. It's just a little pat on the back for me.
So are you going to the Himalayas?
I don't know if that's what's there for me or not, but I certainly do take note of those things.
Very good. Well, I'll go with you.
Deal.
Personally, I don't really subscribe to any religion. My only religion is I don't know. I don't know really anything. The question that drives me is who am I? And you take away the label. So you take away Gene, you take away mom, you take away divorced parents, you take away everything, real estate, workforce meditations, life force meditation, take it all away. Who is Gene?
The simple answer for me is I'm an eternal being living a human existence. That's all I know. But I will say that the idea of who I am and what this is not existent for me. I don't need to know.
So it's the wrong question.
To me, it's just the amazing experience of living out this human experience as a spirit or a soul that's eternal and watching it unfold like a beautiful rosebud every day. There doesn't need to be an answer, and I don't even need to live in the question.
That's good. I need to work on that.
That's not the truth. What I say is not the truth.
But I like it because I think of this every day. Who am I? Who am I? Who am I? Who am I? Again, I'm not a big religion person, but the yogi from India, the guy that walked around with a loincloth all the time.
There's quite a few of those.
Maharishi.
Okay.
He used to talk about, self-realization through self-inquiry. Mm-hmm. Continually ask, who am I? Who am I? And then when a thought comes, who's producing the thought? Who's producing it? So I've kind of adopted that. And it is freeing a little bit. And then also I tie in the impermanence part that, nothing's going to last. So if I don't know who I am and I don't really know what's going on and none of it's going to last anyway, why hold on, right? What are you holding on to?
Well, it's kind of like getting a new book and reading the last page. There's no point in going through every other page to get there. We're not given the last page because that's the fun of it, is taking it page by page.
There is no last page. Well, I guess there's a last page at the last moment, but that's another discussion.
For sure.
Well, thank you, Jean. This was a fantastic conversation. I really enjoyed it. I feel very enlightened after our conversation.
Wow.
Can I steal your twig story? Or
absolutely.
Okay.
My twig is for everyone. And I appreciate, too, having these kinds of conversations is impactful for the world. And the more that this happens, the more it will continue to happen. And I'm so privileged to have been a part of it. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you again for listening. And please leave any comments or suggestions. We're always looking for ways to improve our show and make it the best show it can possibly be. Visit mindfulaccord.com, where you can find additional episodes and you can follow our blog. We give some helpful information on mindfulness, meditation, and just ways to manage our everyday stressful lives. And most importantly, if you know of a friend or a family member that would benefit from this story, please share it with them. Until next time, I'm Rich Decker.